Hi, everyone. Thanks for checking out this edition of the Safe Travels podcast. My name is Joey. We were at Canyonlands and Arches National Parks, and while we were there, we sat down with Park Ranger and Search and Rescue Coordinator Brian Hayes to talk all about search and rescue, the team, and what they go through on a daily basis. Brian, thanks so much for doing this. It's beautiful being at Arches and Canyonlands, two amazing places.
Glad to be here.
But what got you into the Park Service, and how long have you been in this area?
Yeah, great. So I've been in this area for 12 years, which is a pretty long time.
It is.
What got me into being a ranger is when I was in college, I thought I'd do a bunch of different things. I had all these ideas, but every summer I wanted to work for the Park Service because it was just a fun job, right? So I did a bunch of different majors, but worked for the Park Service every summer. And I eventually realized I'm going to keep wanting to do this once I'm done with school. So I got into it just from working seasonally in school, and then just found that I was really interested in being a ranger and pursuing this career. So that's how I got into it.
And I know you're a climber. What are some of the recreational activities that you were into as a kid and are still into that, got you interested in the outdoors?
Yeah, totally. So growing up, our family did all kinds of stuff outdoors. My dad took me down slot canyons in Zion, and we went backpacking everywhere. But yeah, I'm a climber. I've climbed all over the Western U.S. I think having that outdoor background and interest has also led me into search and rescue and being a ranger. You mentioned you didn't start in search and rescue.
How did you start finding out about the different careers in the National Park Service? I think there's such an interest in, obviously, the Arrowhead and the National Park Service, but there's so many different careers.
Right.
How did you start exploring and navigating your career with the NPS?
Yeah, so one of my first seasons, I was a firefighter, wildland firefighter in Yosemite. And I really liked that job and thought it was really interesting. But I also always noticed on the radio all the calls that the rangers were getting, all these search and rescue calls. And I just found myself really drawn to that and interested in it. And so I made the transition from being a wildland firefighter to being a ranger after that, and never looked back.
How has your career progressed to the point where you're at now with search and rescue? What are the levels that you had to go through to get to where you are?
Yeah, so with the Park Service, a lot of times you'll work a season or two, and that's during the busy season of the park. It's like a temporary job. And then once you have some experience, you can apply to get a permanent job with the Park Service. And so I did that same path, became a permanent ranger, and you go through a bunch of different trainings. And then eventually, just after some years, I was able to get the position of being the search and rescue coordinator here.
So diving deeper into search and rescue, SAR as it's commonly referred to, especially within the Park Service, what is the SAR team like at Canyonlands and Arches? What does the team look like? Yeah, that's a great question. So there are only about a dozen of us that are like permanent rangers here that are year-round, kind of the center of the team, right? But we could not do the job alone. We have about probably 40 people total on our search and rescue team. About a dozen of us that are kind of do this, are rangers full-time. And then, 30 or so extras that are folks that work in other divisions in the Park Service, and even some volunteers in the community that we bring in. So it's a mix of full-time and part-time and volunteer people that we put together. But we do need a pretty big group in order to draw upon for the number of incidents that we have. Are there different areas within the SAR team where you have maybe some employees that are really good climbers, other employees that are better suited for other rescue missions? How does that work when you get a call? Yeah, it is specialized out. So we have different specialties, like the technical rescue team that would take care of rescuing climbers or people stuck on cliffs. There's a swiftwater rescue team if people, get their boats pinned on a rock or have an issue down the rivers. We have people that are trained and qualified for working with helicopters. And then, everybody on the team is trained and able to help with just the basic normal calls we get. Twisted ankles, lost hikers,
the majority of our calls are fairly simple, but then the more complex ones, we have those individual teams to take care of.
We're going to jump into the logistics of some of those rescues and how you go about those rescues in a moment. But with volunteers and part-time employees being a part of the SAR team, do you have to go through an annual training season with all the employees?
Yeah, so there is very extensive training to be on the SAR team. One of the things that everyone gets is a basic training on just how to do the nuts and bolts of, what do I bring on this rescue, how to use the radio, how do we search for a lost person, how do we carry out an injured person in the litter. So everyone on the team has to complete and pass a basic level of training and a basic level of fitness to be able to be on the team.
And for the full-time employees that are permanent employees at the parks, how do you guys keep up with your training? Are there new things that you learn from maybe other parks or the NPS that you incorporate into your training or add to your skill set?
Absolutely. So, emergency services is always evolving, right? And there's part of it that's emergency medical care. Some of us are EMTs and paramedics. There's so much to learn there. So we'll have, we have annual training requirements with that. We have a medical director who's an emergency physician that works with our team to make sure we're up to speed on, the next thing, the latest protocols. And then also with every discipline, so whether that's technical rescue, swift water, aviation, searching for lost hikers, we do training in all those fields every year. So this job is pretty training intensive. You have to be trained up on all these things. That's kind of half our job is like being ready, and then the other half is responding to the incidents.
So let's move into those incidents.
Okay.
How is the search and rescue team notified that there is an incident in the park? Is it typically from the person who's experiencing that incident?
Yeah, so most of the calls come in nowadays just from a cell phone, right? There is some cell phone coverage in the parks, and so when someone gets hurt or lost, generally they call 911, and then our dispatch center will dispatch us to the incident. That's how we find out about it initially.
And once you find out about the incident, what are the type of questions you ask in order to staff the proper people to go and respond to this incident?
Yeah, so ideally, we like to just get the phone number directly of the person that's in trouble, if it's possible. And if we can, when you dial 911 nowadays, you typically will get a set of coordinates from the 911 call from your phone. But we like to confirm that location. First off, where are you? What is going on? How many people are with you? And once we can get that information, where they are, what's wrong, then we can start our response.
Once you start your response, depending on the area of the park, I'm sure this changes drastically, but how quickly is the SAR team able to mobilize and respond to an incident?
So, we'll begin our response immediately, but sometimes it takes a long time. Especially if someone's several miles out on the trail, it can be an hour or two until we get there by ground. Now, if someone's having a more serious medical emergency and we're able to fly, then we do have aviation options to send a helicopter, but even that takes some time to mobilize. A lot of people think they're gonna call 911 and there'll be people there right away, but that typically doesn't happen instantly. It takes some time to mobilize and get there to where people are at.
In your long time at these parks, is there an area between Arches or Canyonlands that you find extremely difficult to mobilize and get resources out to in case somebody finds himself in trouble?
That's a great question. There's not necessarily a single area that's more difficult to get to. We'll make a plan to get to anywhere we need to, but the further you are out, the further a person is, the longer it's going to take. And that's a good opportunity if you're planning a trip and you're going to be further out into the backcountry. If a visitor knows they're going to be on a multi-day backpack, a farther hike, a river trip, they should take that into consideration. It's going to be longer for us to be able to come reach you the further you are out there.
What resources should they bring if they're going to go on a long trip like that in order to self-rescue and help themselves? Or what are some skills that they should learn in those types of situations?
Yeah, there's a lot to that question. I think just specifically on the communication part, it's a good idea to bring a cell phone, some type of satellite communication device. Some newer cell phones have satellite text to 911 capability, but a visitor, you should know like what your phone does or doesn't do. You should think about potentially getting a satellite communication device. Even if you don't do both those things, at the very least, you should tell someone where you're going so that they know what your plans are, what time you should be back. And that way, if you don't return, someone can notify the authorities, notify us, and then we can start to look for that person.
This might be a tough question, but is there situations where you feel search and rescue gets called upon that maybe it's not necessary or not needed? How taxing are false calls to SAR when there's other times where you're really needed in an area and you might be responding to something that might not necessarily need your team's help?
We do from time to time get 911 calls that we feel like, well, maybe the people can solve this on their own. The thing is, we don't want to dissuade anyone. If you feel like you need help, you should call. We would rather have people call for help than not call because they're worried that they shouldn't call, right? If you need help, call 911. And sometimes we're able to talk people through it, right? We're able to say, plot their coordinates on a map and tell them, hey, you're a short distance from the trail. Can you walk to the trail with me on the phone? So I would encourage people to always call if you think you need to, and we'll help everyone that we can.
Taking boat, for instance, if you're stuck on the Colorado or the Green River here, what does that process entail of you guys getting out onto the river and locating this person? And then after that, how do you return them back to safety?
Yeah, it depends on what the nature of the incident is. Like if it's a serious medical, then really a helicopter is probably the primary option. If it's something else that someone needs help with, we will respond by boat. But the rivers in Canyonlands are, many, many miles long. And so it can take a while to launch a boat, drive it to the ramp, put it in the water, and drive all the way out to people. So definitely the rivers are one of the most remote areas, and it takes us longer to get there.
Do you find that a lot of travelers go out to the rivers? And is that one of the areas that you most frequently have to respond to?
Well, there's several thousand visitors that float the Green and Colorado rivers every year, Green and Colorado River. But we don't have a huge amount of rescues. Incidents do happen, but the majority of rescues actually happen for day hikers, people that are just out hiking in the park for the day.
What do you find is the most challenging part of the process with SAR when you get the phone call?
One of the most challenging things is many times the information that we get at the beginning of the call is not complete, right? So that might be because we have poor cell coverage. That might be that the report that comes in is just not totally accurate to the situation. So a lot of times that's challenging to figure out, what is going on? Where are people? What do we need? It's that initial 30 minutes or an hour of the response, figuring out what we need to do and what's going on. That's generally the most challenging.
You are very calm. You have a nice demeanor to talk to, and I'm sure you're like that with folks on the phone, for people when they're calling 911 or SAR, I'm sure they're in panic. How important is it for you and your team to be calm in those situations and to think rationally?
It's critical. So we stress that very much, that we have to be thinking clearly. We have to be calm. You don't make good decisions, especially about risk, when you are nervous or excited. So we really try to stress that we're going to help this person in their emergency, but the best way for us to do that is that it's not our emergency. It's our profession. We're going to help as quick and as well as we can, but we try to not get too spun up about it.
Have you always been this calm?
I think after responding to hundreds of rescues over the years, you do kind of learn to just roll with what comes to you.
You mentioned a lot of the rescues that you do aren't incredibly serious, but the fact is you do respond to really serious stuff too. And you and your team, I'm sure, have seen stuff that can be hard to process at times. So after you finish those missions, is there a process that you undergo or your team undergoes to make sure that you mentally and physically are okay after some of those severe rescues that you have to go through?
Yeah, so, we do from time to time see some pretty traumatic things. That can be really traumatic injuries, or sometimes people unfortunately pass away in the park and we have to deal with fatalities. So yeah, there is a cost, mental cost to the job. Some of it can be traumatic. For the most part, we really enjoy being able to help people. It's really fulfilling, but there have been some times that we just see things that are traumatic, right? It's different for every person how to handle that and take care of it. For the team as a whole, we do generally bring in an outside therapist that will come in after a serious incident like that, something traumatic, and we'll just have a debrief, a talk with the team, talk it through, and then if anyone needs, further care, to talk to that person that's available. But for the most part, it's different for everyone. Some people need some time off. Some people, it's better if they're right back at work, right? For me personally, if I can, just understand what happened in the incident, kind of know all the details, that helps me to, for it to kind of rest in my brain a little bit. Like, okay, I know what happened, I know all the parts of it, and then I can kind of move on from it. And then just all the normal things like getting exercise, getting a good night's sleep, being with your peers that are able to support you, being with family and loved ones. It's different for every person, but those are a lot of the ingredients that go towards us trying to maintain our team.
Similar to wildland firefighters, I'm sure there's certain missions that require you stay in the backcountry at times in order to get to areas. Is that taxing as well when you're away from family or on a mission that can be treacherous?
Yeah, so sometimes we do have to spend the night out with people. Like if the call is really late and they're very far out, we'll just hike out there and spend the night like with an injured person, and then either carry them out or fly them out in the morning. A lot of times the calls do happen later in the day. It takes people time to get out to where they're going and for something to go wrong. So it does become taxing, to work late into the evenings and nights. Sometimes that does interrupt personal life. So yeah, that happens.
You mentioned for you to process things, you'd like to understand what fully happened to a situation. Do you work with other interagency or other departments within the National Park Service to investigate these situations? And when you're called on a mission, do you sometimes have to consult with other agencies or departments?
Yeah, for sure. So the Park Service as a whole, every park is its own operation, but we're all also the same agency. So we do work together, we can share resources, we can get support if needed. And then we also have a lot of state and local government partners that we work with. The county sheriff's office, the county emergency medical services team. So we certainly have, outside resources that we draw on for these incidents.
Speaking of that, your team, not you personally, but your team, the SAR team at Canyonlands, was drawn on as an outside resource for, I don't want to say a famous rescue mission, but kind of a famous rescue mission that was made into a movie, 127 Hours. Can you talk about that process of what happened to that climber, hiker, for those that haven't seen the movie, and how Canyonlands SAR was involved in that process?
Yeah, sure. So this is an incident that occurred outside the park, and so the primary jurisdiction for that would be the county sheriff's office, and they were the primary responders to that. But from time to time, if it's a really big incident, we'll help each other. We have agreements in place that we can go outside the park to help a neighboring agency if they request us. And so the park was requested to assist on that incident. It was a big search and then a big rescue. And it's been a long time ago now, but basically there was a hiker that got stuck in a slot canyon and got their arm stuck, wedged with a rock, a boulder. And that person got themselves out, actually, but there were rescue efforts initiated, once he was discovered missing, and the Park Service helps with that.
I'm sure there's been some incredible stories for your team who have rescued people that you have a lot to be proud of. How does that feel when you are called into service and you're able to make an impact on someone's life and rescue them? What are some of the emotions that you take in?
Yeah, for sure. There are definitely rescues where you made a difference, right? Where something bad would have happened to someone had you not been there. That's of course very fulfilling, and I think it really motivates the team, motivates me personally to continue to do this work and try to be our best at it, for sure.
We talked a bit about steps that visitors can take about preventative measures of not getting stuck out in the wilderness and what you need in case you do. How important is it for hikers and explorers in these parks to know their boundaries physically too?
Yeah, that's critical, and there's really multiple stages of this, being able to be prepared to avoid getting into trouble, right? One of the first ones starts when you're at home, and that's just researching your plans, picking things that you're interested in, but that are in your abilities, right? So that's the first one I would say, is do some research, have some ideas about what you want to do when you come visit the park. We want people to have an adventure. We want them to have a good time, but it is not a good time or a good adventure if you end up going to the hospital or end up lost, right? So we want people to do their homework and prepare. The next thing I would say is really, what do you bring with you that on the hike or whatever you're doing? And you need to bring, the 10 essentials. That's food and water, clothing, a way to communicate, all those 10 essentials. And then we also talked about having a communications device and telling someone where you're going and where to expect you back. The last thing I would say that speaks to your question is, okay, you've done all that, you've researched it, you've brought the right equipment, and now you're out there. You still need to be flexible to change your plan, right? Maybe it's hotter today than you thought it was going to be and you need to dial it back. Or maybe there's a storm, or maybe you didn't sleep well that last night. So being flexible and adapting to the conditions of the weather, the conditions that you experience, that's important too, to be able to hike smart, be safe, and have a good visit.
I'm glad you brought up weather, because people might be hearing me shiver a little bit right now. It's pretty cold out here,
Totally.
And there's some good wind gusts, and we even got some snow last night in the surrounding areas. How does weather play an impact on SAR, not only for how you're able to rescue people, but do you see an uptick in certain seasons with how the weather is with rescue missions?
We definitely do. So the primary one that we tend to see is the heat in the summer. And we're on the Colorado Plateau. We're actually fairly high elevation, but it gets really hot here. In arches and canyonlands, it can be above 100 degrees routinely in the summer. And when people come here that haven't hiked or experienced that kind of heat before, it catches people by surprise. And they don't realize, how much water they need, or how hot it really is out on these rocks where there's no shade. There's really just nowhere to go. So in the summertime, we definitely see an uptick of incidents, heat-related illness incidents. And that's another thing I would advise people. If you're coming here, you should start your hike early in the day. Plan to be done before it gets hot, right? Or if you're planning these really bigger, strenuous trips, look to do that in the spring or the fall when it's cooler weather.
Does snow or other weather events like rain, does that impact your mobilization of how you get to somebody?
Yeah, it does for sure. And the one I was thinking of, besides the heat, is if we do get a snowstorm, it makes all the trails, a lot of people hike on them, they get icy, and it does make the trails slick, and we can have just slips and trips where people get hurt in the winter time. So if you're visiting here in the winter, it's a good idea to bring some traction devices like micro spikes for your shoes, or be willing to turn around if the trail's just ice and steep and you're not feeling good about it. It's okay to not go on that stretch.
Before we started this, we were talking off camera about some missions you've done where you've been latched onto a helicopter, go down to the ground, attend to the person there, and then get picked back up. I admire you because I mentioned that you seem like a fearless person, but you mentioned you do have some fears. What are some things that you have to overcome in order to be successful in this position? And are you a bit of a thrill seeker and enjoy those types of missions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I definitely would not, I don't think I'm fearless for sure. But it helps to, especially with heights, we deal with heights a lot in this job. Whether that is, like you mentioned, sometimes we're underneath a helicopter on a rope to effect a rescue, or we're just we're just up on the cliffs on ropes. So it does help to have some experience, like as a climber, have some background in that. Anyone would be scared if you've never been on a rescue on a river before and you're in a boat in a rapid, right? You're going to be scared. But the more experience you have in those settings, you're able to know when things are okay and when they're not okay. So, no, I don't think I do enjoy adventure sports, but I also like to know that I'm going to be safe. And our rescue team, we don't want to take big risks, right? We want to know that we are going to be safe because we're prepared, we've trained up, we have the right equipment. And there are risks involved, but we don't want to take routine risks. We want to be as safe as we can.
Well, as we start to wind this down, I think one of the key parts about national parks, beyond preserving them, is the dual mandate, right? But also allowing visitors to access them. And I think there's so much peace and joy that visitors get to find in these parks because of people like you and the work that you're able to do and provide for them in case there is an emergency. And I'm sure you've seen and had some hard moments in these parks, but what do you find peaceful and inspirational about working and living in and around these parks?
Oh yeah, every day, like just driving to work and driving into a national park, it's very inspiring, and I feel lucky to be able to do this. Every time I drive into the park, I think this is it's a great place to work. I feel fortunate to do so.
Well, final question for you. You have any final thoughts for the people listening or watching on search and rescue, or maybe just your favorite part about these parks?
Yeah, totally. I mean, some final thoughts about search and rescue. We want people to come enjoy the park and to get after it and have an adventure, but you don't want to get hurt out there. It's not fun. It takes a long time for us to rescue you. The recovery from some of these injuries I've seen can be life-changing. So we want people to plan ahead and be safe. We will always help you as much as we can when people call for help, but it is much better to not get in trouble in the first place.
Awesome. Well, Brian, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Enjoyed it.
Thanks for checking out this edition of the Safe Travels podcast. I really hope you enjoyed it. Brian and his team are incredible, and the parks and certainly the visitors wouldn't be the same without them. So if you enjoyed this episode, it would mean a whole lot to me if you liked, commented, and subscribed. And until next time, safe travels.